You're listening to the Believe in Giants podcast with two-time Super Bowl winner Carl Banks and the voice of the Giants, Bob Papa.
And we welcome you to another edition of Believe in Giants presented by FanDuel. Bob Papa, two-time Super Bowl champion, Carl Banks, Ian O'Connor of The Athletic with us as well. This is a busy week with the NFL draft. The Mets, they keep losing. The Yankees finally righted themselves a little bit. It feels like Judge hits a home run in the first inning. And I know before we started this broadcast, which is being recorded on Monday morning, you guys were chopping it up about the big Knicks game tonight as well. So there's a lot going on in the NFL world and in New York sports right now.
Yeah, high expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking to you guys earlier about game one and in the middle of I think it was the fourth quarter when word got out that in the Garden that Dexter Lawrence was no longer a Giant, you could feel and hear a buzz in the crowd. And so I don't know, the Giants fans I talked to, they did not want to see Dex leave. They realized he's a good player, but they thought it was a great trade. So obviously we'll see how that plays out, but it was interesting the reaction that I got that night from Giants fans in the crowd that I ran into after the game who were pretty pumped up about what the Giants did.
Ian, it appeared to me as these negotiations went on and we started to get more valid reporting that strategically, I think the end game was just to be out of New York. Just as I look at it, you had the agent who isolated the general manager, and which is interesting, right? Where you say, I don't want to negotiate with this guy, I want to negotiate with these guys. And then a player who did not want to interview the new head coach. You have one side saying, hey, we'd love to have him here. We'd love to work it out with the Giants. You know, a lot of that is in case it does work out, they want to be on the right side of it. And then on the other side, you have strategically a tact of, hey, we're going to do whatever we can to be out of here because we don't want to be here anymore. I mean, all the signs point to that. I think whenever the decision was made that he no longer wanted to be a Giant, maybe that was the first day it came out, they did everything they could to make sure that happened. And I'm not sure if there were a deal on the table that didn't include the 10th pick on the draft, if his position would have changed either way.
Yeah, Carl, and I think that it was interesting. The dynamic in the front office with the Giants right now is something that's going to be watched closely in the coming months. And rightfully so. There's been a big change there. Obviously, John Harbaugh, the first coach ever with the Giants to report directly to ownership. Don Aponte, a very respected executive in the league for a long time, now in there. And I think I don't think Joe Schoen was iced out of this process by people in the Giants front office or John Harbaugh. I think just the way it played out with his relationship strained with Joel Segal, Dexter Lawrence's agent, that Don Aponte and John Harbaugh had to get involved to try to see if they could save this situation. At the end of the day, it reminded me a little bit of, I know we're going back a long ways and it's a different sport, but when Pat Riley got hired by the Knicks, Patrick Ewing wanted out. And he did not really want to sit down with Pat Riley. He asked for a trade. He was frustrated with the losing. It reminded me, I'm not saying Dexter Lawrence is as good a football player as Patrick Ewing was a basketball player, but Pat Riley sat down with him face-to-face in Washington, D.C. and convinced him to stay. I think if Harbaugh had that opportunity, Dexter Lawrence might still be a Giant today, but he was not granted that chance by Joel Segal, and so here we are. But at the end of the day, if you're a new head coach and you have a significant player who's clearly saying, I don't want to be here, I think you have to make that trade. I think it actually sends a good message to the other players, to the entire organization and fan base that the bottom line requirement for a New York Giant is you have to want to be a New York Giant. And if you don't want to be, you will no longer be here.
Yeah, and with all due respect to Dexter Lawrence, because he was phenomenal in 22 and 23, and he was dominant in 24 before he got hurt. But there's no banners hanging anywhere with Dexter Lawrence's name on it. You know, it's a 3-year window, 3.5 or 2 3/4 window of him playing on a Pro Bowl, all-pro level, respected around the National Football League by everybody as one of the more dominant players. But if you don't want to be here, it's not like he's got championships that he's attached to and the franchise and winning. I think Harbaugh and the Giants had to get him out of here because can you imagine going to training camp, your first training camp, with this 10-year deal that you're going to be here and you're going to reshape this franchise, and you took this job because of the franchise's reputation and everything else, to have this hanging over your head would have been an absolute nightmare for him because it polarizes the locker room, doesn't it, Carl?
It does. I think your players end up taking sides, right? And at the end of the day, the business is the business, but it's all the side talk. It's all the distraction. It's having to answer questions about whether or not a player is going to be there, whether or not the player wants to be there. And then all eyes are on the player. You know, how's he practicing? Is he giving everything? Does he care? What does he say when he's not on the field? And so you have to make sure that when you walk into training camp, all minds are clear and there is one stated mission.
Yeah, and listen, one thing that I think needs to be made clear is that the Giants did do everything possible to keep him. They offered him a new contract. And I don't know how that contract compared to what the Bengals did for Dexter Lawrence and adding a year and $28 million. And I don't know if it was more money, less money, but they did offer him a new deal, and they didn't have to do that. And I think they went above and beyond to try to keep him. And again, Harbaugh and the Ponte meeting, I don't know if it was, I believe it was face-to-face with Joel Segal. Maybe it was by Zoom, but that meeting happened. And if that wasn't enough to convince Dexter Lawrence to stay a Giant, and you're right, Bob, I think the Giants, since they drafted Dexter, and I'm not saying it's his fault, they're 44 games under 500. Mm-hmm. So it's the old saying, well, we've lost with you, we could lose without you. Right? And I'm not blaming him for that, but that is a reality. The team needs to be retooled in some way to make a difference here. And I think getting the 10th overall pick for a non-quarterback who's unhappy, coming off a down year by his standards, who has 7 years of NFL mileage on his legs already, that to me is a good trade. I don't care how you define it. That is a good deal. Now we'll see who they get with the 10th pick and how that player plays over the long haul. But for now, that looks like a very good deal.
Yeah, Ian, that is well, it will go down as a kind of a franchise changing moment in the notebooks, because prior to that, it was Saquon Barkley, who everyone said they let him go for free. And this time they got a really good trade done, a top 10 pick for a defensive lineman. Now, what they do with that pick, it certainly should set with the first two picks, but with that pick, it should certainly set the trajectory of the franchise in terms of the type of talent that's available. That's going to be, you talked about a guy with 7 years long-term. The Giants make out if they get the right player, because they will have that player longer than the Bengals will have Dexter Lawrence. So we'll see how it works out. But I think, if you had to let a player go and get the 10th pick in the draft, I'd say that's a pretty good deal.
Ian, how shocked do you think Harbaugh was? I mean, again, this is a guy that potentially is going to be in the Hall of Fame someday. He's a Super Bowl champion. He's got 193 wins. He's got an impeccable reputation as a head coach. The fact that an agent would not let the player talk to him, I mean, it seems a little odd. It seems as if maybe this was their way to engineer that there's no way he's coming back, because maybe the agent knew Harbaugh would be able to convince him to stay. But I'm sure Harbaugh didn't take too kindly to this. And it's not like this agent doesn't have other players and other players that won't be doing business with the Giants in the future. It just seemed a little odd and disrespectful based on Harbaugh's resume that you would not afford someone like that the opportunity to at least sit and talk with a player.
Well, in the case
who is under contract to the team, by the way, at the time.
That's right. They didn't have to do anything. And they did a lot to try to make this work for Dexter Lawrence and his agent. And the case I mentioned earlier, David Falk, who's as big an NBA agent as we've ever seen, allowed Patrick Ewing to sit with Pat Riley, and that changed the dynamic. And maybe Joel Segal was afraid that was going to happen. I don't know. But I also think Dexter Lawrence could have overruled his agent and said, no, I want to hear this man out. I will say that when John Harbaugh met Dexter Lawrence the first time, there was no mention of any contract issues. So I think the head coach was taken aback a little bit by this stance. Now, maybe you could argue, certainly in your first conversation with your new boss, you're not going to bring that up. But I think Harbaugh was a little bit surprised by this stance and just how firm it was on Dexter Lawrence's side of the table. Yeah, it's just I don't think it's and talking to somebody close to the situation a couple of days ago, I don't think it's lost on the head coach that this also does send a message to the entire organization that if you do not want to be here and you're not fully committed to the New York Football Giants, you won't be here. And even if you're as good a player as Dexter Lawrence. So it's kind of interesting that he ends up Dex is now the problem of Harbaugh's old team, the Ravens. They have to deal with him. And I have a feeling he'll play at a high level for a couple of years. And there may be occasions where Giants fans are second guessing this move when he does play at that level. But I didn't see another way out of this. The Giants tried to make it work with the agent, tried to make it work with the player. They offered a new deal. They didn't have to do that. And it just wasn't working. And they had to make this move.
And I just think strategically that there was just, Bob talked about the agent, the player could have overruled the agent, and the agent does work for the player. But I just think that sit down was with the agent. They said, are you sure you don't want to be here? Because I'm going to do everything possible to get you out. And at that point, when they decided that, it was like he didn't care. It's like he didn't want to deal with talking to the coach, because if the intent was to give the Giants a chance, he would have met with the coach, and that's business, right? It's his prerogative to say yes or no, but everybody knows he don't want to be here now. That was the statement. I don't want to be a New York Giant, and there's that. But then there's this other part where people and they, strategically they had a plan. I give it to them, because you had a fan base who were screaming how underpaid he was. He was the third highest paid defensive lineman when he signed his deal. He had years left on it. And again, I always advocate for players to get as much money as possible, but you come off a down year, you want to be paid amongst the top, that's your prerogative, but he wasn't woefully underpaid. He signed the deal, and as contracts go in the NFL, it's just like buying a car. It depreciates in value the minute you sign it, because the next guy in the salary cap and all these other things. So it sets a market, and then you give somebody else a chance to make more in the coming years. So he wasn't woefully underpaid. He was adequately paid when he signed the contract. He was paid as a top guy. He had 2 years left on it, right? So, it's his prerogative, and I want guys to get as much money as possible. But let's not make like he was beaten over the head and was a pauper or something.
Well, listen. I was with several guys that play in the league this past weekend. Nothing to do with the Giants. And, when he got his contract extension, his 4-year extension, that kicked in 24, right? So there's $21 million a year kicked in 24. When he went to the team last year, 1 year into a new 4-year extension. Some of the guys that I was with this weekend that I talked with, they're like, yeah, no team. There's not a team in the league that 1 year into a 4-year extension is going to go back into it and sweeten it up. Nobody. There's not a team in the league. He's like, that is crazy. And one of the guys said to me, he goes, you know what that was? Dexter was the big man on campus for the Giants. He played really well in 24. That first year of the new deal, got hurt. And the agent and Dexter's camp were trying to leverage the Giants a little bit with the whole Saquon, the way the whole Saquon thing played out, because he was the big man on campus. Let's go back for some more money here because they're going to have to give it to us because after what happened with Saquon, they can't look bad again. And the Giants said, no, we're not. Howie Roseman wouldn't do it. Nobody in the league would 1 year into a 4-year extension say, let's tear it up and reopen it again. And then he puts bad football on tape last year. And now in year 2, he wants it sweetened again. On what grounds would you ever go into that contract again and say, oh, yeah, we got to add a whole lot more money to it?
Yeah, and you see this all the time with quarterbacks, franchise players in the NFL. They sign a record contract, and 2 years later, it looks like the guy's underpaid. It's all about timing with these contracts. Mm-hmm. And I agree. I think Dexter Lawrence is a businessman, just like the rest of us, and he should get every last penny he can get. We know that careers in the NFL are short. It's a violent game, and I don't begrudge him at all. Anything he can get wherever he wants to get it. Mm-hmm. I think what's hard to understand, maybe for us, Carl being a 2-time Super Bowl champion with this franchise, playing at a very, very high level. Bob and I grew up in the area. Like, why would you want to leave New York? You know, it might be hard for us to understand that given just our history. And also when you have a potentially Hall of Fame coach coming in, this isn't Pat Shermer, Brian Dable, Joe Judge, Ben McAdoo. This is John Harbaugh coming in. It's an exciting time. You've got just an opportunity here to be part of something special, maybe build the next 2-3 years into a Super Bowl contender with this coach. And now you want to leave. So it's possible that the frustration of all the losing just built up over time. And that's what really inspired this push to get out of New York. It's just an interesting time for me to want to leave. This is a time that I think a lot of guys around the league want to go to New York, or at least have the Giants on their list of potential destinations, unlike in the recent past. So, you know, maybe it's hard for us to understand where he's coming from because of our histories, particularly Carl, because of what you did for the Giants and winning a couple championships and understanding, like very few people on the planet understand it, what it means to be a champion in New York. It's just different than other markets. And so I guess that did not factor in with Dex's decision.
Well, what you find out with certain athletes, and this is not a character issue, is just New York is not for them, right? It's always the intensity of a fan base that, you know, will look at something and they will exalt you when you're great, but they also pay attention when you're not, and you've got to be cognizant of that, and you've got to continue to work. You know, the one thing that, and I just had a conversation with someone about Harry Carson. The one thing that Harry Carson always made sure that we knew, because he was here during the very, very bad times, he would always make sure that we understood there was a fan base that's waiting for us to do good. And even if we were losing games, the fan base wanted us to play hard. And he would say it during a game. He would say it during practice. He and George Martin always harped on, our fan base deserves X, Y, and Z. We can't give these. We're embarrassing ourselves in front of these fans. So that's what, you know, this New York sports culture and New York Giants football sports culture is about. It's always been about, you know, putting your best effort forward for a fan base. And sometimes that pressure, especially in today's social media world, can be a lot. And I'm not saying that Dexter chose an easier path. He just chose a path that was better for him, clearly. And that's real. And that's, you know, that's his prerogative, right? New York ain't for everybody, but those who get here and those who win are rewarded greatly for life.
Well, Ian and I are old enough to remember as kids, Harry playing on some of those god-awful teams.
Yeah.
There were some off seasons where Harry Carson demanded to be traded. He couldn't take it anymore. But they're like, we're not trading a good football player. And basically what happened was he saw the franchise then starting to shift. And then George Young comes in, and suddenly now there's a Phil Simms who's got potential, and then Lawrence Taylor in 1981. And Harry's tune suddenly changed, realizing that, hey, there's now a path here for what you later delivered in 1986 of winning a championship. I mean, I understand that Dexter didn't like the losing, but I would have thought that Harbaugh would have been a sign of like, okay, now we have a runway here. But for whatever the reason, he's gone. Carl, do you feel a little vindicated would be the wrong word to use here, but you know, we look at the tape, we watch the games, we watch the numerous weeks in which backup centers and guards played against the Giants, and the lack of productivity. And, you know, so a lot of people took shots at you for your honest take, but at the end of the day, what you said turned out to, you know, it was accurate. What's your thoughts on kind of the way this whole thing is played out?
I mean, it is what it is. I don't, you know me, Bob, I don't pull punches, and I stand by what I said. And, you know, and subsequently he went on and had the last 3 games of the season were pretty good for him. And we praised him for that. But when you are a player, and this is just not related to Dexter, but in general, when there's a standard that either you set by your play or the team sets for you, and you've played to that standard, and you're playing below that standard, it has to be noted, especially someone with a high skill level. And, you know, there are people still to this day who will put, you know, statistics up, and they will say, you know, he was double teamed more than anybody in the NFLs. And I was like, okay, he was double teamed the same amount and made the Pro Bowl the year before. But that's neither here or there. My point is, you can statistically do well in any year. There's a statistic that'll show that you still did the same things, but that doesn't mean you had a good year. Did you have the same impact with the same statistics? And that's the thing that when you look at that, and I, you know, because I'm a Giant, right? I'm a Giant first, so I don't do the back and forth when people are saying things that are verifiably false in order to make sure that the kid doesn't look bad, and I'm good with that. But when I have coaches say to me, we liked him, don't wake him up. You know, why'd you do that? Now he's going to wake up and play. We liked him where he was. Meaning that the guy that they were seeing on tape was a lot easier to play against and to block than before I said what I said. And I had guys after that game, or after that clip came out in October, were telling me. And I had people telling me before, but that's neither here or there. My assessment was what I saw, a string of, you know, it is what it is. But the clip is being replayed a ton of times now. But, you know, he's not here. So it is what it is. And I stand by what I said.
And if you look at the numbers, I doubt the Giants brought these numbers up, but they could have in these negotiations that didn't last very long to try to keep him in New York. Sacks, obviously, half a sack, the worst number of his career. Combined tackles, 31, the worst number of his career. You look at tackles for loss, 4, the second worst number of his career. Quarterback hits, 8, the worst number of his career. So what Carl said statistically is true, certainly, and his opinion is more valid than many others, simply given his experience and what he accomplished on the defensive side of the ball for this franchise. And what I don't understand is, why did it take Carl to say that? Like, shouldn't somebody inside the organization have said those things to light that fire underneath this player before it got to that point? And if you have other coaches saying, "Oh man, I wish you didn't wake him up," that's to me an indictment of the Giants staff. So yeah, but I have a feeling now he's going to have a pretty big year for Cincinnati, and this move, this conversation around him having a down year, statistically maybe his worst year, even though he was double teamed more than just about anybody else in the league. I have a feeling he'll play really well for Cincinnati, at least in the short term. And then the Giants have to hit pick number 10.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure he's going to show up in better shape than he did last year in Cincinnati. And now he's got his contract extension. So onward and upward. Are you still locked in at 5 with Sonny Styles?
Yeah, like 4 weeks ago, I had tweeted out that I was putting my $20 on Sonny Styles. I think that I mentioned this to somebody in the Giants organization a couple of days ago, that, okay, you've lost a very big human being in the middle of your defense. Sonny Styles is 6'5", 244. Obviously doesn't play the same position as Dexter Lawrence, but he's in the heart of your defense at that size. Would you take him over a safety who's 5'11", 6 feet, 206 pounds, and was a very, very good football player in Downs? So if it comes down to Styles versus Downs, to me, and certainly I'm not watching tape like the coaching staff and the scouts, but I would take the bigger man. I think when the Giants have been great, we've talked about this in the past, that it's about having a really nasty defense that gets people on the ground very quickly. The two people in the division you have to get on the ground right now are Saquon Barkley and Jaden Daniels. And Sonny Styles, to me, is the best player to do that. John Harbaugh has said stopping the run is really the number one priority. And I've had some people say, well, you know, Caleb Downs is great against the run too, just from a different position. And that's true. So the question to me comes down to not necessarily Styles versus Downs. It's more Love, if he's there at 5, versus Styles / Downs. And I know the Giants, Harbaugh, they love. So it would be hard to argue against taking arguably the best player in the draft. And if you don't take him, then you might have to tackle him in the division if he goes to Washington. So, man, they have a lot of
bigger guy, right?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I think I'm going to stay with Sonny Styles. I'm not sure that's going to happen. If they take Love particularly, it'd be hard to argue against that. But I think it's going to be a very, very interesting Thursday night.
Yeah, I do too. And here's the reason I would not take a Caleb Downs is because if people are saying he's a great tackler, that's a waste of his talent. Like, if you want him as a box safety and you want to draft him that high, you got more problems in front of him. And that's not where you want to fill it with a guy of his skill set. You want him all over the field in pass coverage. But the other part that makes me like Sonny Styles is the move of teams to get bigger, still athletic, but bigger at the second level of their defense. Teams are running the ball more than they have over the past 5 years, right? You look at the formula for the Seattle Seahawks, right? You look at Philadelphia, you look at Buffalo, who had 1,600 yards rushing with Josh Allen. So teams are taking advantage, and the defenses are always the slowest to adapt to the change in how offenses play. Everybody thought they had to be smaller and quicker to defend mobile quarterbacks and spread offenses. Well, quarterbacks have become more mediocre because there are not as many elite ones, right? That shift always comes in the league too, where the changing of the guard, and you got to wait for the next group of guys. And in the meantime, in the interim, teams are running the ball more. And you're finding that your guys don't hold up at the second level. And that's why the rushing numbers are up over the past 5 years because of the size of defenses. So I like where Harbaugh is because he was the guy that was pounding these little defenses with his guys. So he knows you've got to be able to stop the run, and he's going to, try to put players in there that could do that. I don't know if Styles is that guy, but I like the fact that Styles is in the conversation.
It's not. Listen, just looking at numerous mock drafts, and they're mock drafts, they're people's opinions. The medicals aren't factored into that, which is always huge. But it's not that unrealistic to think that the Giants could get Styles at 5 and still get the safety at 10.
Sure.
So it's very much in play. A lot of mock drafts that I've seen had Cincinnati taking the safety at 10. Well, now the Giants have that pick. I mean, they could get a linebacker and a safety in the first 10 picks.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that it's more likely Downs is available at 10 than Styles.
Right.
So if you're trying to get both, I would take Styles first. And then again, he's 6'5", 244. If it's a tie, that's a tiebreaker to me over a 6 foot, 206 pound safety. That's just my opinion. And I don't know. It's going to be fascinating though if Love is there, because the Giants do like him a lot. And man, he's a player. He might be the best player. And if you don't take him, now you're going to have to tackle him if Washington takes him. So it's just, hey, it's great. There are probably, a lot of people think there are 20 to 25 really good players in this draft, and then there's a drop-off. And the Giants are going to get 2 of them unless they trade out of that 10th spot, which is possible. Yeah. And as you know, there's a hole in their draft between, 37 and 105? There's a big hole there because of the Dart trade. So they could trade back out of number 10. But if they stay where they are, they're going to get 2 very good football players in a draft that's not the deepest that we've seen.
Right. I mean, they could, let's say they take the linebacker. We're just spitballing here. Let's say they take the linebacker at 5. They really like the safety, but the safety comes off the board. You could potentially trade back for a team that's hungry for a wide receiver or whatever the case may be, and peel back a few spots and still get a corner or maybe a wide receiver, and maybe add that extra pick that you're missing. I mean, they have a lot of options, put it that way.
Yeah, they do. And, wide receiver is interesting too. And of course, they did go out to Arizona State for the Tyson workout. And my understanding was they were hoping he was going to run the 40. And I don't think he did. So, but he's an option at 10. Some people think he's the only really top flight number 1 wide receiver in the draft, as good as Tate is. So if you go defense at 5, do you then go to wide receiver at 10, particularly if Downs is off the board? And you look at the Giants depth chart now, who's the second best receiver on that team? It's probably Slayton. It might be Mooney. But obviously there's a bit of a hole there. And unless you're an Odell Beckham fan and want him to be re-signed, which is a possibility, they could really use a boost at wide receiver. So they have a lot of holes, and that's why John Harbaugh was hired to not only coach up these guys, but also use his expertise with one of the best to ever do it, Nazi Newsome, and Eric DeCosta, one of the better GMs in the league. And so John has a lot of experience in shaping and building a roster, and they need that right now.
The other thing, too, that I think is worth noting, probably once you get past 5, if you're saying there are only 20 really good players in this draft and then there's a drop-off, there's going to be a lot of maneuvering between 5 and 10 of teams that's trying to get up to get in that talent pool.
Yeah. I mean, I think that spot 10 could be up for sale, right? I think they could. I could see them moving back out of that spot if the player that they really covet there is gone. The other thing about the receiver thing is, here's the other thing that we don't know that only they know, and that is that, you get the reports, right, about guys returning from injury. But Malik Nabers is coming off several injuries and several surgeries. Like, we have no idea for real when he's going to be ready. And the other thing that you also have to take into account with him is, as dynamic as he's been, he has had injuries now each of the first 2 years. He hasn't been clean 17-17, the first 2 years of his career. So that, I'm sure, is factoring into how they maneuver with these 2 picks in the first round, and even with that pick in the second round as far as what they're targeting, because only they know what the doctors and the trainers are telling them as far as realistically when he's going to be back and close to being what he was when he was healthy.
You're also going to see the tight end used a lot in this offense. You've seen the investment that Harbaugh has made in that position, and that's going to compensate for some of what we're talking about here. I also think Slayton is going to have a bounce back year, healthier off the hamstring injuries, and a guy who publicly campaigned for a Coughlin-esque coach, and he got one. So I have a feeling Slayton is going to play really well this year by his standards. And so, but yes, there are a number of positions where the Giants need some help, and wide receiver is still one of them. And Nabers, is he really going to be healthy weeks 1, 2, and 3? Is it going to take him time to work into the season? I suspect it will. So they do need help at that position.
Ian, I had a question for you. As Harbaugh has settled into the job here, your sense of sort of how things are coming together. Obviously, what was he at the Knicks game last week or something like that? He was at the Garden.
He was at the Garden. I know he loves the Garden, and he's become a little bit of a Knicks fan. I believe his wife is a Nets fan. I'm not quite sure the genesis of that, but I don't know when's the last time he was at the Garden. I don't believe he was at the playoff game I was at when the deal was made. I don't think he was there. But yeah, he's tried to get into the city a few times and to enjoy it, but he's been a little busy. So, but I know he did say that he loved the atmosphere in the Garden when he was there for a Knicks game.
Carl, what do you think they're going to do?
I've gotten sucked into this positional value dialogue that's going. I think they're going to pick the player that fits what they're trying to do. Like, I look at teams and say, okay, what do they value more so than what the folks that, are not drafting for the team? They just look at a collection of players and say, well, this one has better positional value for 5 years down the road. The Giants are drafting now for now and now for later. So they're going to pick a guy that they feel that they value, the area of the team that they value, that they got to get better at. So it very well could be Styles, but Love, I wouldn't be upset with either.
It'll be interesting too. Like
Harbaugh values running the football. You look at his teams. What do they value? Right? In Baltimore, they value running the football. They value physical defenses. So those two kind of fit the profile.
And I know fans get all swept up in, the safety, linebackers, there's corners, there's wide receivers. I could see with that 10th pick, or maybe even if they wind up trading back, they have some issues on the interior of the offensive line. Like, what happens if they have a really high grade on one of these old linemen? And I was listening to Brad Hopkins in my drives yesterday all over the state of Florida, and Charles Davis, and they were talking about, the Giants could take one of these offensive linemen like Baltimore did with Jonathan Ogden, who was projected as a tackle, but they started him off as a guard and then became a Hall of Fame tackle. I mean, it's not as if they don't have some issues on the interior of the offensive line that they couldn't say, oh my gosh, a 10, or if we trade back because somebody really wants this wide receiver and we go 3 spots back, that there's not an offensive lineman there that they have a tremendous grade on. They don't say, okay, we just fortified this spot for a long period of time.
Yeah, so I don't know if the Miami tackle, Maui Noah, is he going to be there at 10? But if he is, yeah. And now you have your 2 tackles signed if you're the Giants and bring back Illuminor, but maybe you move the Miami tackle to guard. You could do that at 10 if he's there. But my guess is that that won't happen in round 1. I think the Giants, after the draft, will probably add a veteran guard, bring back maybe Van Roten or something of that nature. But yeah, to me, I'm gonna stay with my original bet, Styles at 5, and then at 10, it's possible Downs is still there. If not, maybe go to receiver. And we'll find out how much they liked or didn't like that workout at Arizona State with Tyson. Yeah, I think that they're not likely to go offensive line in round 1, but I'm certainly willing to be surprised.
The only reason why I threw it out there is because of something that you had said on an earlier podcast, Ian, is that Harbaugh signed a 10-year deal with the Giants. Okay, he didn't come in here as a highly decorated coach, looking to come in and do a quick fix and strike glory like right out of the gate. Like you've told us and our audience, very well sourced, that like this guy's in this for the long haul. He's younger than he appears age-wise. If you're around him in person, there's no way you have him at what, 63? You're saying to yourself, okay, this guy's like 52, 53. Like, so he carries himself, and he signed this long-term deal with the Giants. So I would think the only reason why I threw offensive lineman in is because of wanting to be physical at the point of attack. And I'm thinking, he's thinking, we want to get this thing fixed, but we're also looking long game here of building a team that's going to be sustainable. And, hey, if we take this, we like this offensive lineman, interior guy that we can eventually kick out to tackle or whatever the case may be. Hey, this is like, I don't expect to be out of here in 3 years or 4 years.
Right.
I expect to be here for 10 and compete for championships, for most of the time that I'm here. So that's why I wouldn't rule out the O-line play if the value is, if the grade on the player that they have is so high that it becomes a no-brainer. Because this isn't a Pete Carroll quick fix in Las Vegas.
I could see him coaching more than 10 years. And you look at guys today, look at Belichick still coaching, look at Rick Pitino, wants to coach to maybe he's 80 years old at St. John's. And yeah, it's changed now, where used to be where, no, I'm not going to be the next Marv Levy. Now we see a lot of guys coaching into their 70s. So I think Harbaugh thinks 10 years and beyond, and God willing. And so, yeah, that makes sense. I think that you could also argue that, hey, the number one thing the Giants have had when they've won Super Bowls is a very physical, near dominant defense. The second thing is the offensive line. So that comes into play, perhaps. The third thing is an opportunistic quarterback, not a superstar. And Eli Manning and Phil Simms were quarterbacks who were not superstar players, but could play like a superstar when it mattered most. And it seems like those three things have been in place for the 4 Super Bowl championship teams. But I always think when it's the Giants, when they're really good, the first thing is defense. Yep. And so when you've had John Harbaugh talk about stopping the run, if you can't stop the run, you can't even breathe in this league. He is, I just, when I heard him say those words, that's when I felt like Styles to me made the most sense. Now I've seen other people say it's not going to be Styles, and they may be right. And he still needs to grow. And others have compared him to Brian Urlacher, just a more athletic version. And if you're getting that, to me, that's what I would want first and foremost. But I would not argue against Love, and maybe their scouts think Downs is a better player. I don't know. But I'd have a hard time going with a player that size over the size and athleticism of Sonny Styles.
Carl, you got anything else? Are you going to be at the Garden for the Knicks?
That's all I got. No, I'll be in front of the TV watching it tonight.
All right, Ian will be chronicling it. Ian, we appreciate joining us on this
Thanks so much,
pre-draft version.
My pleasure.
Hey,
guys.
we're just guesstimating right now, right?
I will actually be at the draft too, by the way.
Oh, that's right. You got the starter activation going, right?
Yeah, I got a big meeting down there with NFL relative to starter, but we're going to be there. So I'll be around. I'll probably be around for that first pick anyway.
Can you guys at least make a prediction? You kind of forced me to make one here. So I want
Sonny
to hear.
Styles.
Okay,
Sonny
Bob.
Styles.
Caleb Downs at 5.
All
I'm
right.
going Caleb. I'm going Caleb Downs at 5, and then at 10, I think it's open for sale.
Yeah, I can't think past 5 because it's gonna change so much at 6 through 10. I think, if you've got a talent deficit in the league after 20, you're gonna see players trying to get in that top 10. So we'll see what happens. We'll see teams trying to get in the top 10.
Can I throw a caveat into this, Ian?
Go.
Sure, yeah.
All right, you've been saying Styles all along, right?
I'm starting to waver on that, but yes, I have.
Okay. However, if Love is available, is Styles still the pick?
Oh, man, I think you might then see the Giants go Love and hope they get Downs at 10. Like if you get Love and Downs, it's hard to argue against that.
Okay.
And man, again, if you don't take Love, you're gonna have to tackle him maybe in the division for the next 10 years. Yeah. If he goes to Washington, and that's tough.
And you don't want him in Washington.
Yeah, I'd be if I'm a Giants fan, I'd be more than happy with Love and Downs at 5 and 10. I'd be very happy. Downs over Styles. It seems that more people believe that will happen than Styles over Downs. It's almost 50-50, but the slight edge might be to Downs there. So I am wavering a little bit, but I'll go down with the ship, Sonny Styles.
All right, there you have it. All right, we'll be back next week. We'll chop it up and we'll see how off we were or how right we were. We're going to watch on Thursday night. We'll watch on Friday. We'll see how this whole thing unfolds. And Ian, we appreciate the time. Enjoy the game tonight. Carl, how do we like to end this thing?
Tell a friend to tell a friend. Believe in Giants.